This talk is about x86 binary rewriting. It's the work that I did during my PhD thesis. It's actually ongoing work at the University of Texas at Dallas under Dr. Kevin Hamlin and the guy that was my research partner, Vishwath Mohan. So I'm going to do a short autobiography, then we'll talk about like the attack surface that we're considering and like the history of it and where it is now. And then we'll start talking about rewriting x86 and different things that you can do with it. I'll show you one way to defeat ROP via rewriting, ways to enforce security policies, and then just general do-it-yourself, what do you want to do with rewriting? And then we'll have some questions. So, like I said, I'm Richard Wortell. My PhD was from UT Dallas, and that's what this was the work for my thesis. Ever since I've been working at Mandiant, now FireEye, doing malware analysis, incident response. I've done some work on automated unpacking of binaries, and just all general security work. And now I'm part of the newly formed Flare team in FireEye that focuses entirely on reverse engineering and research. So the attack surface that we're considering here is just the old general one where there's some user that has the ability to provide input. They cause a buffer overflow, and then suddenly you have an exploited process. So the way that this worked for a long time is that the attacker would just cause this buffer overflow and throw a bunch of code onto the stack and just execute their code onto the stack. That's no longer an option most of the time because the stack is usually non-executable, so that's kind of solved that problem. So attackers had to get a little more clever, and they started doing this trick called return to libc, where they cause a buffer overflow, and then they would just push evil arguments and the address of some exploitable library call onto the stack, and then that's how they would accomplish their task. So ASLR came out to be kind of the solution to this. ASLR randomizes the image base of libraries, so now the attacker doesn't necessarily know exactly where that library is in memory and doesn't know the address to put onto the stack. That's not entirely true, and I'll get into why. But so this caused attackers to get even more clever. So the new kind of gold standard is return-oriented programming, where the attacker actually uses your own code against you. What they do is they look for a series of gadgets, and then they force them to be executed in sequence. A gadget is a series of instructions anywhere inside of executable process memory that ends in a return. So this is kind of the high-level view of how crafting a ROP attack would look. So an attacker does his analysis, figures out exactly where these gadgets are in memory, pulls them out, and figures out a sequence of them that he can use to his advantage. So then at runtime, he smashes the stack, pushes all of these gadgets, the addresses of these gadgets onto the stack, and because they all end with a return, each one will execute in sequence, and then you have then they've accomplished their goal and you're owned. So why do you care? There's a bunch of people interested in this right now. A lot of people throwing a lot of money at mitigation techniques. Microsoft's Blue Hat that they do every year, they were spending more than $250,000 on mitigation techniques. And then there's a great story about a hacker named Pinkie Pie who found a ROP attack inside of Chrome, told Google about it. They paid him 60 grand. They patched it. Then he found another one inside of their patch, and he got another 60 grand out of them. So like, there's a lot of money in this. So ROP is this thing where you have to know where your feature set is so that you can craft your attack. So as a defense strategy, we need to be able to either randomize that feature set, or we need to be able to remove that feature set. So that's kind of the general mitigation approach that we wanted to take. There's a lot of solutions out there for this already. There's anti-ROP compilers, so if you have source code, you can compile it and you can try and remove unintended gadgets because you can have unintended gadgets hidden in instructions. You can kind of minimize the number of returns. There's a lot of ways to harden against ROP attacks if you have source code. However, you don't always have source code. What if you're running legacy binaries? ASLR kind of protects against ROP because you're randomizing the image base. However, with the right gadgets, you can actually calculate where you are in memory. So ASLR doesn't entirely protect you from that. Also, you can still brute force an attack, and I'll talk a little bit about the entropy of a brute force attack later. There's also a couple of new solutions that came out recently, IPR and ILR. One of them is focused entirely on virtualizing every single process, and so that way you wouldn't be able to craft your attack because it's being virtualized. However, they can't randomize all of their instructions, and they have to buffer their virtualized instructions at some point. Then IPR also attempts to kind of rewrite a binary looking for instructions that have gadgets in them, or a series of gadgets or a series of instructions somewhere that they can change. Like, this series of instructions is equivalent to this, so we can swap them out and we can remove this gadget. And they can do some small randomization of instructions. However, they can't break all gadgets. I mean, it's really difficult to do because of things like indirect jumps. And also, they have a deployment issue. Every single binary that they want to deploy, they would have to rerun their software on in order to get a newly randomized binary. So our general goal was, let's make a self-randomizing binary. Let's take a binary and turn it into one where it's going to randomize at runtime. We want to have low overhead, complete gadget removal, and we want to have really flexible deployment. We don't want to run into the issue that I was discussing just a second ago. And then we also want no code producer cooperation. We want to be able to support legacy binaries. We don't want to rely on source code, symbolic information, debugging information, anything like that. We want to be able to take a legacy binary and make it more secure. So this is kind of the high-level view of our goal. If this is like a binary, and the text section of a binary, and every one of these blocks is a basic block. So we define a basic code block as anything that ends in an unconditional branch, so a jump or a return. And we want to randomize at the basic block level. So the rewritten binary is not actually going to look that much different. There's going to be some changes in it that I'll discuss in a bit. However, at runtime, all of those basic blocks are going to randomize. And then if you run it again, they're going to randomize again. So every time you run it, it'll randomize at the basic block level. So this is a really tough problem, though. In order to do this kind of rewriting, you have to solve the problem of disassembly. And disassembly is really hard. So it's actually a provably undecidable problem to determine what the intended instruction sequence that a compiler, what instruction sequence a compiler intended from a series of bytes. And even the best disassemblers out there make mistakes. IDA, that obviously we all use and love, and it's basically the best out there right now, it'll still make mistakes of saying, oh, this is actually code, and then it falls through to data. So all of these numbers are just a simple script that I wrote for a couple binaries where IDA was saying, this sequence, this is a series of code instructions, and those code instructions would have fallen through into things that it called data. So that's obviously a mistake. So why is it undecidable? If you have a series of bytes and you try to say, hey, this is the intended instruction sequence. If you start from the beginning and just start disassembling straight line, this is from the sequence of bytes, these are the instructions you get. But there's actually nothing wrong with getting to like a return instruction and saying, okay, after this, these are data bytes. So in the first example, we're treating 1 byte as data. In the second example, we're treating 2 bytes as data. And you get different instruction sequences. And every single one of these is a valid instruction sequence. In x86, you have variable length instructions. You can branch anywhere in memory. So you can go to any of these bytes. So these are all valid instruction sequences. So the solution that we came up with is called STIR, or self-transforming instruction relocation. So what we do is we statically rewrite legacy binaries so that they will randomize at the basic block level. That really increases the search space. If you wanted to guess where your gadgets are for a ROP attack, it becomes really, really difficult. So we introduced no deployment issues. We did this for Windows and Linux, and we're successful on both. And I'll show some numbers a little bit later. But we have a little less than 2% overhead on average. So we're really successful in rewriting these. So the general architecture here, what we do is we take the original binary, we disassemble it conservatively, and I'll describe what I mean by that in just a second. We generate a lookup table, and I'll describe that as well in a second. And then we put all that back together into a self-stirring binary, the binary that we want, so that at runtime, we have this load time randomizer, which is like a helper library that will randomize it at runtime and then pass execution to the binary, and suddenly you have your randomized binary. So what do I mean by conservative disassembly? Like I was just saying, you can't determine what is the actual set of instructions you want to include in your rewritten binary. So what we do is we say, we don't care. We'll include all of them. So what we do is we start disassembling from the very first byte and say, okay, treat it as code, go through, and just start disassembling. So we include that instruction sequence in our rewritten binary. Then we go back to any bytes that we haven't treated as the beginning of an instruction, and we treat that as an instruction too. And all we have to do is tack that on to the end of our instructions, and then add a jump instruction that points to where it should be going after that instruction. So we do that with every single byte. We get to certain bytes, and when we disassemble, we'll say, like at this B0 byte, that's a move instruction. It would fall through to this FFFF byte. That's an invalid opcode, so we actually don't have to include that path because we know we would just be causing a crash if we include that. So we get rid of that, and then we can just include all of the valid paths through the code section in our rewritten binary. So then that's only kind of half the battle. That's how we know that we have all of the code. We know we'll have those code paths in our binary. But we need to be able to ensure that the behavior is still there. So since we're rewriting, there's indirect branches inside of x86 binaries. If you get to an indirect branch and you've rewritten things, that indirect branch is still going to hold an address, and that address is going to be pointing to the original location it thought it was going to go to. So if you've rewritten things, it's going to go to the wrong place. So we turn the old code section into this dynamic jump table. So what we're doing is we're taking the old code section, and at every target, everything that we think is a target, we put a marker byte there that says, okay, you're in the old code section, and then we put a pointer to where the new location is. And I'll describe how we use this in a second. So this is all that's changing in terms of, this was the high level view, and now we're at the low level view. So in this function, if you look at the actual bytes and what's changing, the first 5 bytes are all that's changing here. We're changing the first byte to a marker byte, and then the next 4 are changing to a pointer to the new location. So you'll see the next 4 bytes there are actually the same as the address of the rewritten function 1. So that function 1 is, we now know exactly where it is in memory when we're running. So how does this work? Like that's how we rewrite, but that's not how we maintain behavior. So originally, like I was saying, say that EAX had this value in it. If in this sequence of instructions, the call EAX gets hit, and then that just passes execution to its target, this pop. However, in our rewritten binary, EAX is still going to have that address. Like, we're not going through and trying to determine what is going to be calculated at runtime. It's an impossible problem. So what we do is, EAX has that value. We do a compare and we say, okay, are you in the old code section? Are you pointing to the old code section? Because if it is a computed jump pointing there, we need to point it to the new location. So with one instruction, this compare, we see, okay, it's pointing to, it would have jumped to the old code section. We use F4 because that's a system level instruction. You shouldn't see that used in userland code, so that's why we can use that byte as a marker byte. So we see that F4, and then we use the CMove instruction to say, okay, if you see that F4 byte, it's pointing to the old code section. We need to dereference and take the pointer and put that back into EAX. So now EAX points to the right place, the call gets hit, and it goes to the right location in our rewritten code. So that's how we handle the behavior and keep everything flowing smoothly. So this is a description of exactly what's rewritten in our binaries. We only touch code sections. We don't touch any of the other sections in a binary. If you have an IAT, data section, all of that we leave alone. The old code section we turn into that dynamic jump table like I was discussing. And then the new code section is your rewritten code with however you've rewritten it, including these instructions I was just discussing in order to maintain behavior. So then at load time, our helper library goes, loads the new binary, and then randomizes it, updates the lookup table pointers, and then execution is passed to the new start address. So here's a demo. All right. So I have this binary that I've rewritten. Oh, that's... So when we load this up, doing this and all, everybody can see that, right? Nah, just kidding. So when we load this up, oh, you've got to be kidding me. I have a way to do this. I had a Zoom program on here and it is now gone, apparently. Sorry? All right. Anyways, so this is not working whatsoever. But, yeah, demo gods are not with me. I knew this was going to happen. So when you run this, you have to maintain one instruction at a static place because you can't randomize the entry point of the binary. The Windows loader has to know where to start executing. So at that point, we just have a jump to where the new start address is. So we have one instruction. Wow, that was great. So we have, so this jump will go to 4144FF, and then execution goes on as normal. How do I get out of this? So if we rerun this, thanks, Ollie, for all your messages. You'll notice this is going to a different address. So every time we rerun this, it's actually going to be going to a different place in memory. So it is randomizing at a basic block level every single time. So as you can see, it's now going to 41031E. So it has randomized every time. That's about as good as it can go, as good as it gets with demos for this. All right. So in terms of entropy, like what are we doing here? So if you wanted to brute force an attack against a binary that's you've run ASLR on, it's going to take you 2 to the n minus 1 number of probes in order to guess where that is. So it's exponential in terms of how many probes that you have to do. However, with ours, because you then, after guessing where it is in memory, you have to guess where every single gadget is in memory. So it actually becomes factorial to guess the number of probes it would take in order to brute force a ROP attack on ours. So we've greatly increased the entropy of brute forcing an attack. In terms of gadget elimination, we get rid of almost 100% of gadgets. So the way that we tested this was we would run a binary and then we would run Mona on it. We would rip out everything, all of the code, and run Mona on it and say, okay, show us where all of the gadgets are. And then we would call a gadget eliminated if it never showed up in the same place in memory again. So we would run it like, I think we did 100 times, and any gadget that actually showed up in the same place, we said that that was a gadget you could have used. And we got, on average, about 99.98% of gadgets were eliminated every single time. So the reason it's not 100% is you have really tiny gadgets that just by bad luck will land in the same place. Not necessarily every time. They most definitely won't land in the same place every time, but sometimes they will. So you'll have things like Pop Ret that'll land in the same place, but we don't really care. Like it's going to land in the same place, but you can't really craft an attack from this. You could string together a bunch of pops and stack pivot maybe, but that's about as much as you can do with this. So in terms of overhead, we get very little overhead. This is the overhead for the Spec 2000 suite for Windows. Here's our Linux runtime overhead. We actually have this working on the whole core utils suite for Linux. We got every single one of them rewriting successfully. So that's about it for Stir. Like this first static rewriter to protect against ROP attacks, we greatly increased search space, and we got this working for Windows and Linux with very low overhead and almost 100% gadget reduction. So we were really happy with our results there. However, we basically came up with a generic binary rewriting technique. So what else could we do with this? So what if we wanted to do security policies based on API calls? What if you download something you don't trust and you want to apply a security policy to it? So we came up with another rewriter. So this one allows us to wrap system library calls with APIs with our own code so that we can do these security policies. And then we wrote a policy specification language so that you can write a regular expression-based policy and say, okay, this security policy, apply it to this binary, and then you feel safer. So we do this via software fault isolation and inline reference monitoring. So software fault isolation is the idea that you have trusted and untrusted modules in the same memory address space, and you want to protect the trusted ones from the untrusted ones doing bad things. So, for example, you may have a web browser that has plugins that you don't trust. You have your trusted system libraries inside an untrusted application. So the general goal is, can we separate those somehow so that we can and watch and guarantee to make sure that there's no evil happening in between those. So if you're able to do that, if you're able to kind of set up the separation of trusted and untrusted, you can sit in between and put something called an inline reference monitor in between. So if you're sitting in between and saying, oh, that looks evil, you can also say, all right, this is something that could be evil and violates a security policy. So what I was discussing about applying security policies falls immediately into this. You can write, if you have an inline reference monitor in place, you can write security policies based on it. So for example, you may want to have Adobe Reader access the network and read your files and be able to do all that. But if it reads certain files, you want to block it from accessing the network again because you don't want it to be able to send those. That's a security policy that you could put in place with our system. So this kind of work has been done for a while. It was originally done on RISC a long time ago, I think 96 if I remember right, by Wab et al. And then there has been a lot of work out of Microsoft and Google and a team that did the system called Pittsfield. And they all have come up with solutions to this, but every single one of them has required code producer cooperation. So the Microsoft work all requires a PDB. Pittsfield and NACL, which is Google's work, both require a special version of GCC, so you need source code. So all of these are requiring code producer cooperation, which we don't want to do. We want to be able to support legacy binaries. So our solution involves a number of steps. First, we separate trusted and untrusted modules into high and low memory. So high memory is trusted, low memory is untrusted, and then we use masking to enforce this. I'll show exactly how in a second. And then we use the Pittsfield approach in order to get software fault isolation working. How Pittsfield gets this working is they say break every single, every group of 16 bytes into an atomic unit of execution, and then if you have to begin executing that, they call them chunks, from the beginning, and if you start executing a chunk, you have to execute it all the way through to the end. And I'll show exactly how we do that in just a second. And then we use the same framework that we did for stir in order to maintain behavior. So the rewriting happens the same way. We use that compare cmove and cmove instruction in order to maintain behavior of indirect jumps. So like I was saying, we break the trusted modules and untrusted modules apart at a separating line of high and low memory, where high memory is where it's trusted and low memory is untrusted. This separation has to happen at a power of 2. It doesn't actually matter where. The only thing that will change based on where your separation is what mask you're going to use. So Pittsfield says break everything into 16-byte chunks, and how they do that is just by including instructions and moving things around and then turning them into atomic units of execution. So first, they move targets to the beginning of chunks. So if you see what's changed here, that call instruction was pointing to this push instruction. We've just included 4 no-op bytes so that that push instruction is at the beginning of 16 bytes. So that it's at C0 now, whereas it was at BC. We also move calls to the end of chunks. So when a call instruction gets hit, we want the return from a call to be the beginning of a chunk. So we have to have we have to move every call to the end of a chunk. So as you can see, both of the addresses of these calls have moved up, and we've included no ops so that those calls are at the end of chunks. We need to make sure that no instruction overlaps the chunk boundary because you don't want to be executing in the middle of some instruction. So that push was overlapping a chunk boundary. We've now pushed that to the beginning of a chunk. And then we mask indirect branches like I was saying. So this is the mask that we're using here. If, like I was saying, d equals 20, or we have this separation at 2 to the power of d. Here, if d equals 28, you mask the top, the 4 high order bits. That's where, so it's 0x0. That's us masking and saying, okay, you can't branch into trusted memory. So that's how we ensure that you can't go into trusted memory. And then we mask low order bits as well. So since it's 16-byte chunks, if you mask the low 4 order bits, you're going to say, okay, you also can't go anywhere except the beginning of a chunk. So you can't go into trusted memory, and you also have to go to the beginning of a chunk. So that's how we turn everything into atomic units of execution. And then we add guard instructions to ensure that ensure behavioral equivalence. Like I was saying, the compare and cmove instructions are still in there because we need those in order to determine, all right, you're in an old code section, this is how we get back to the new code section. So we put this all together where you have a binary and a policy, you pass it to our rewriter, and it creates this policy adherent binary. And we actually were very successful. We had an email client that we rewrote and disallowed creation of executables, made policies based on SMTP connections, disallowed launching of Windows Explorer. So we actually had a lot of success in terms of like applying these policies to a real world piece of software. Then just for fun, we actually rewrote some malware to stop it from propagating and things like that. We were successful with that as well. So this is our Windows runtime overhead, and we had about, on average, 4% overhead, and obviously variable based on a number of things, but on average we were at about 4%. So that's everything with Brains. We were able to put together a rewriter for specifying security policies, but there's still, like, what else can we do? We've done we have this rewriting framework, and you really can do anything that you want. So say that you want to take a legacy binary and obfuscate it for some reason. You can make a rewriter that goes through and inserts junk code everywhere. So as you can see, the original binary had just this push and call. You can insert junk code all around it and calls to junk functions. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. This is a rewriter you could easily write. You could introduce stack canaries. If you don't know stack canaries, it's the idea of pushing a value calculated at runtime onto the stack before every call, and then checking it before the return to make sure that the stack hasn't been corrupted. So you could implement stack canaries. If anybody's not seen a stack canary, they look a little like that. And then, or you could do just stupid things if you want. Like say you're writing CTF challenges. You could make a rewriter that includes your signature somewhere or hides CTF keys in places. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So you could also make these as rewriters. So that's just some of the ideas that I've had that people could do. This is ongoing work at UTD, like I said. So they're still working on kind of generalizing this, and it's actually available code if anybody's interested in it. We're happy to distribute it. I don't think we have it up anywhere, but we hand it out to anybody that asks. So you can just contact me if you'd like to get access to the code. But yeah, so just to conclude, we've first binary rewriter for x86. It requires no metadata, no source code, no symbolic information. We have it working for Linux and Windows. We have 2 proof of concepts, and we get very low overhead. That's one of the beauties of static rewriting, is you get very low overhead. So just as a shameless plug at the end, I actually just wrote a CTF challenge that this is the best place to get people to do. This is going to launch on July 7th, and I'd like everybody to go ahead and do it if they want to. Series of reversing challenges. This is what I do all day, and I had a lot of fun writing these. So if anybody's interested, they run the gamut of x86, x64, PE, ELF files, everything. So check out flare-on.com if you want to do some CTFs. So then I'll take questions. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, this is a question we get almost every single time. Sadly, I don't have the best of answers for this. We had, he asked how we get negative overhead on sometimes. And yeah, it's a very good question. We tried to figure this out in a number of different ways. We kind of theorized that we're doing a lot of changes to the binary, so any data, like big chunks of data that have no valid code paths in them, don't actually get included in the new code section. So one of the things that we think is happening is those big chunks of data aren't included in the new code section, so caching is a little bit better, and that causes speed ups for some programs. We had one theory with STIR at least, which is since we're walking the entire binary, and so what we first do when we rewrite everything is we walk through everything and randomize it. You're kind of caching inside of the processor to do that, so you have everything in cache memory. However, what we did to test this is we made another rewriter that just didn't randomize the binary. It actually just walked through memory and then just passed execution. It never randomized it, and we didn't really see a correlation. So this is a graph of the stirred binary numbers versus when we just did that walking and then executing. So we're pretty sure that that's not the cause of it. But yeah, I don't have a 100% this is exactly why we get negative numbers, but we do sometimes. Yeah.
How does this handle self-modifying code?
So he asked how it handles self-modifying code. The answer is it doesn't really. There's not a good solution to that because there's no guarantees of a static solution to self-modifying code. Going through and guaranteeing like this is what it's going to do, I mean, you have to emulate the whole way through, hopefully, and then try and say, okay, I have all the code paths, I know exactly what it's going to do, I can include it. So it's a really tough problem to do statically. However, since we're trying to support this is kind of a preventative measure for legacy binaries, is kind of one of the things that one of the benefits of it. So we're kind of saying you're probably not going to run into as much self-modifying code. Rewriting malware and the things that are doing the majority of self-modifying code isn't really that's not the people that are going to use this, I would say.
How do you feel about instruction set randomization as like a topic or research area or commercialization avenue, given that blind return-oriented programming has been demonstrated where people can construct rock gadgets without any memory disclosure?
So yeah, it is a possibility, and I mean, there's no foolproof. Like, there was no point in this where I wanted to say, so cool, we solved ROP. Like, it's, we haven't solved ROP. There's still attacks possible. And by instruction set randomization, you mean what I'm doing, or like the other research that's been done? Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it's valid work. I think it's valid, and it does protect against some ROP attacks. But yeah, obviously, there's no foolproof way. Sorry? Oh, I honestly don't even remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, that is a valid question in terms of how to avoid, that you could predict them at runtime. But yeah, I'm not sure what we're using off the top of my head. Sorry. No, I've never heard that question before. Sorry. He was asking about this will make post-mortem crash analysis a lot harder because the code's all been randomized, so every time it crashes, you're going to have a different code. That's a very good question. We actually never even thought of that. So in terms of, yeah, it would. Anything that you would do to make post-mortem crash analysis easier, you're kind of going to be stepping back and making it easier to exploit. So that's a really tough problem that I honestly haven't thought about. So thanks for that. Sure. Oh.
As far as I understood, in order to forward incorrect targets to their new locations. You inserted an F4 byte followed by the new target at the original location in the code section. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what happens if you have two targets that are within 5 bytes of one another?
That's a great question. We actually have solutions for that. You can kind of play some memory tricks for when you run into that. So you can automated look, we'll know when we have two targets that are overlapping. What we do right now is we automatically determine which we think is the more likely to be used, because a lot of times you're going to have one target that is much more likely just based on general code semantics. However, we actually have run into binaries where the silliest of things happen. Like there is a function that the only thing that it does is XOR, it clears EAX and then returns. Like that's 3 bytes and it totally screws us up. However, there's kind of memory tricks that you can look at in our paper. I don't actually have a slide for it, but if we take it offline, I can describe exactly how we solve that. But there's basically memory tricks where you put F4s in both places, and then based on where those are now going to be pointing to, you put the lookup table in those locations. So there's a limited number of them that we can have based on that kind of hack, but we can solve it that way, and we had to for a couple of the binaries that we had to get working.
Given that you use the compare and the C move before the indirect branches, you're making assumptions here on the calling convention that the flags won't be live, for instance?
Sorry, that the flags aren't live. Yeah, we do make assumptions on that. There's solutions to it in terms of like caching them in places and stuff like that, but we really didn't run into it being an issue ever. So, because the majority of times branching, they're not preserving flags across branches. So, it never really became an issue, but we did think of it and came up with solutions, but they're mainly just engineering tasks rather than research.
Thank you.
Sure. Any more questions?
So, based on the question from the gentleman about actually crash analysis, are you able to de-steer an executable that you to remove and do the inverse mapping or the bijective operation? So
sorry, what do you mean by unstir? Like, how can you?
So to undo, to take one, basically you have a PRNG. If you store the state of this PRNG and the output of it, that plus the stirred binary could maybe be turned back into an actual original binary.
Sure. We haven't done much research on it. If we're using, if you can predict exactly what's been used to randomize, you could technically unstir. However, we haven't done that much analysis on it.
Okay, but that could be a solution to do crash dump and postmortem analysis, because if you store privately and keep for yourself, maybe based on the crash, you could demap the memory address.
Yeah, no, that's could be an elegant solution for it.
So I think you kind of it's me.
Sorry?
I think you kind of glossed over the actual.
Sorry, where can you raise? Okay, cool, thanks.
You kind of, I think, skipped over the actual randomization. Well, not randomization, but rewriting and shuffling step.
Yeah.
So I didn't really get that part. Like you kind of somehow detect basic blocks, then you shuffle them, and you write it a new code section. But what if you accidentally disassemble data and you just shuffle the data, and the original code relies on this data?
So
how does it work?
That goes back to our conservative disassembly. So the original code section, actually, we are leaving all of that alone. So the
original code is still there.
Yeah, the original code section, the only modifications that we're making to it is we're setting that section non-executable because we're treating it as a data section now. And then we are overwriting those targets with the marker byte and the new location.
Okay.
So that data will still exist, and if it ever gets referenced, it'll still get used successfully, no problem. If we think anything that is code is code that is actually data. It's just going to be dead code paths inside of our new binary, inside of the new code section.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Cool. Thanks a lot. It was really cool to talk to Recon.